Today, when people think of medieval times, visions of castles, knights, and grand feasts come to mind, though the reality of life in medieval England for a peasant was a daily struggle for survival. Death was lurking behind every dangerous and filthy corner with each breath you took in your harsh surroundings. There was a good chance you would perish from quite a number of horrific fates, challenging your survival each grueling day. Now, let us discover the most probable causes of your early demise as a peasant in medieval England. Childbirth and giving birth. It is beyond comprehension to imagine what the loss of a child would feel like. Though in the Middle Ages of England, infant mortality is assumed to have been around 25% for 1-year-olds and younger. Between the ages of 1 to 4 years, this horrific rate decreased to a still substantial 12.5%. In other words, over 1/3 of medieval English children passed away before 5 years of age. Of course, there would have been numerous factors that caused such high figures. These would include a lack of proper nourishment for women during pregnancy and the living conditions of poverty-stricken households at that time. Though when compared to American statistics for the year 2022, where infant mortality rates were 5.6 infant deaths per 1,000 live births, these medieval mortality rates are astounding. Therefore, if you were born in medieval England, there was a 37% chance you would not see your 5th birthday. Childbirth also presented serious challenges for women because of strict roles and oppressive conditions. This included their choices when it came to having children. It was expected that women would deliver offspring for a family, attend numerous household chores, and share in the field work. All of these considerable tasks meant women were constantly working, with little consideration for their personal well-being. The only other accepted option for women in medieval times was becoming a nun at a convent or abbey. This choice would allow them to escape the dangerous situation of medieval childbirth. It is estimated that childbirth was the leading cause of death for English women in the early medieval period, between the late 5th to 11th centuries. Various researchers give a mortality rate for women from childbirth in medieval times a range of 10% to 30%, with odds of a danger increasing with higher numbers of pregnancies. It has even been noted that women in the latter Middle Ages made a last will and testament well before childbirth, as their chances for survival were greatly challenged. These figures are horrific when compared to the 2021 maternal mortality rate in the United States, which was 32.9 deaths per 100,000 live births. The Black Death and other plague outbreaks. The Black Death arrived in southern England during the year 1348 AD, destroying an estimated 40% to 60% of medieval England's population. So, if you were fortunate enough to reach 5 years of age in medieval England, plague outbreaks would lessen your odds of survival even further. Unfortunately, people today are still affected by this fatal illness. In Madagascar, an outbreak of this plague killed 170 people in October 2017, along with thousands of others becoming infected. The Great Famine and other famines. The majority of medieval people living in England were peasants, and their food choices were severely limited compared to modern standards. Since their sustenance depended mainly on agriculture, lives were very much tied to the land. If extreme weather conditions resulted in crop failures, the consequences from medieval famines were horrific. The deadliest medieval famine in England was the Great Famine of Europe, which lasted from 1315 to 1322 AD. It brought devastating hunger, starvation, fatal illnesses, and crime across the country. It is estimated that between 5% to 10% of medieval England's population perished from this one famine alone. During the Great Famine of Europe, medieval English peasants were estimated to have an average life expectancy of 30 years. This figure was so low in part due to the high mortality rate of those 15 years of age and younger. With so much of their harvest going to landowners in the church, medieval English peasants were already challenged to put food on the table. Medieval war and defending your own country. Many wars were fought in Middle Ages Europe in an endless lust for land and power, which meant soldiers from realms all over Europe were amassed to fight for one powerful leader or another. Under the feudal system, if your landlord waged war, you were obligated to fight. Of course, wars would expose you to a dangerous environment where your chances of dying from various events increased dramatically. Though if you survived your first 40 days of service, one would be allowed in many instances to return home. This also ensured there were enough peasants to fight the next battle and tend to the agricultural production needed for another conflict. Medieval peasants were not professional soldiers, and oftentimes they were improperly equipped or fed to wage war. The mortality rates for peasants in medieval battles was not tracked with any certainty, but were thought to be quite high. This assumption would make sense, since the mortality rate for privileged noblemen in battle was estimated to be approximately 30%. In addition, the consequences from losing battles meant mass retribution upon the defeated army, implying that your chances as a soldier for survival were greatly decreased. Adding to the perils of war in another land, you did not even have to leave home to be involved in conflicts. If an enemy or invader from another realm decided the area in which you lived was vulnerable, your homelands would have no choice but to defend and protect. During the Middle Ages in England, this would include battling invaders over centuries, which included Vikings and the Normans. Infectious diseases and hygiene. Diseases were rampant in the medieval living environment. This was especially true for medieval English peasant homes, crudely constructed small places with dirt floors covered in rushes or grasses. These floor coverings were not changed for months, if not years. In many cases, only the top layers would be refreshed, leaving a mat of unchanged rushes or grasses underneath. This would become a hosting place for vermin, lice, food droppings, animal excrement, and other unsavory things. Along with cramped living conditions shared with livestock for warmth in winter, these homes would be a breeding ground for various infectious bacteria and diseases. Tuberculosis and dysentery were among the various illnesses contracted by unknowing medieval English peasants and their families. With peasants comprising over 80% of the medieval English population during this period, you would most likely be a part of this suffering majority. From lack of bathing to wearing the same soiled wool clothing on a daily basis, you were also at greater risk for contracting illness and disease. Various reasons included unsanitary hygiene practices, no running water, and the constant presence of filth, both inside and outside your home. Food fungus. One of the main staples of nourishment for medieval English peasants was bread, with the key ingredient of rye often used. The potentially fatal issue here is that if the rye used contained the fungus Claviceps purpurea, it would cause what we know today as ergotism. Peasants consuming this infected bread would experience everything from hallucinations and harsh convulsions to infected body parts, which could eventually fall off their body. In medieval times, this poisoning was known as St. Anthony's fire, and these outbreaks caused thousands of deaths in the Middle Ages. Medieval medical practices. You did not want to become ill in medieval England, where the practice of medicine was an educated guess by physicians at the best of times. That is, if you could afford a physician, which as a peasant meant you probably could not. Therefore, you would be left with choices for a cure from herbal or folk remedies. Even practicing physicians, with their lack of modern knowledge, used cures such as bloodletting, purging, and using astrological charts to determine causes and cures for illnesses. As for surgery, this would be performed by barber surgeons. They used unsterilized instruments and no anesthetic. Yes, your chances of survival after becoming ill were very much like a game of chance. Medieval travel. Lacking the convenience of modern transportation and accommodations like hotels, medieval travel was challenging. If one were fortunate, there may be a monastery or inn situated along your desired route for an overnight rest. However, if no lodging was available, your only option was to sleep rough in the open outdoors. That would be a dangerous decision which could involve taking many risks. For instance, roving bands of robbers and other bad characters could attack you and your possessions. In addition, wild animals had much freer reign than today, and their aggressiveness could cause you great harm. These are some of the reasons why taking medieval journeys with a group increased your odds for survival. Random violence. Make no mistake, the medieval times were a gruesome period for acts of violence. Oftentimes, you could be in harmful situations with other people that seen you as a threat or opportunity for their own survival. According to some sources, the violent act of murder was 10 times more likely in medieval England than in modern times. Furthermore, it is estimated that over 45% of medieval English mortalities for men 15 years of age and older were the result of a violent act. With all of these major life-threatening events which could happen at any time, your chances of surviving as a medieval English peasant were not very high. These common causes of an untimely death make people ask one question: how did any medieval English peasant survive just 1 year? Thank you for supporting us at MedievaltoModern. Please be sure to watch our next episode or one shown at the end of this video. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and spread the word about this channel so we can create more exciting content. I wish you good tidings as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.